Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is a bonus episode of Funeral Service Insider, the podcast. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been introducing you to some of the members of our advisory board for Kates-Boylston. This is a group of people from the industry who are going to, help us take a look at the magazine and our coverage of the industry and maybe help us round it out, maybe help us make it better, maybe help us change direction where needed. We're really excited to get input from so many bright people. And one of the reasons we're doing this show is to introduce these incredibly bright people to you so that you have confidence that we've made a great decision. And this week's guest is no exception. We are speaking with Lacyn Barton. She is the manager of funeral revenue and merchandising at Service Corporation International. She's had a spectacular career, and we talk about it a little bit, and I'm not going to keep you from it. So I'm going to turn you over to Lacyn. We're going to chat for maybe 10 or so minutes, and then catch me on the other side because there are a couple of notices I wanted to bring to your attention. But right now, let's get into it. Here's Lacyn. Well, welcome. I wanted to take this opportunity to get you to introduce yourself to the listeners and to the KB audience and talk about a little bit about your career so far in funeral service.
Well, to start, I'm Lacyn Barton. I am a licensed funeral director and embalmer, also crematory operator and a certified celebrant. Gosh, I've been in funeral service 22 years,
Wow.
13 of which were for privately owned funeral homes all across the country. I joined SCI 9 years ago. That's when I came to Virginia, and I have been here ever since. But my current role, I am manager of funeral revenue and merchandising, which means that I manage funeral pricing and merchandise for about 400 SCI funeral home locations in North America and Puerto Rico. I also support our pricing and merchandising transitions for new acquisitions. So that's a hot topic this year.
It really has been.
Yeah. So in the realm of funeral service regulation, I am president of the Virginia Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers. I am also on the board of directors for the International Conference of Funeral Service Examining Boards. And as director of District 2, I represent the regulatory agencies for Delaware and Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you joined this board because you were literally bored. You had too much time on your hands. And
Oh
you're
my
like,
gosh. Yes. Gosh, talking about time, time management is really a thing in today's world. And, when you're passionate about so many things, you find the time, right?
Right.
About passion, I am passionate about serving veterans and members of the armed forces. So I'm also on the board of directors for the Virginia War Memorial Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And a longtime sponsor and guardian for honor flight missions that take veterans to the memorials built in honor of their service in Washington, D.C.
So 1 billion years ago, when I started as a reporter, one of my first assignments was to write a story about what it's like to learn to fly an airplane. And I flew with a guy named Andy Sherrill, and that was his primary thing. He flew veterans because we're on Maryland's Eastern Shore, which is not that far from you. And he flew veterans to Washington, D.C. all the time. That was like his main thing. And I'd never heard of that before. And I think it's just the most fantastic thing.
It really is. And it's such a rewarding experience for these veterans. And it's just very humbling to be a part of those missions.
You mentioned celebrants, and I've never asked a veteran funeral director about this before. When did you become a celebrant? Like, what was the tipping point where you said, this is a skill that I really need to add?
Oh my goodness. Great question. I became a celebrant in 2011. And honestly, it was because of the changing dynamics in funeral service and our customers where I was living at the time. Not many had, a church affiliation or close with their own pastor, or just looking for a different type of service with, minimal or sometimes even no religious aspects. And since I'm comfortable with, public speaking and getting to know these people to celebrate their lives was just a really rewarding part of my job. So that's why I did it.
Yeah, and it's funny because as a lot of my coverage is on kind of like this transitional responsibilities for funeral directors, and I think maybe let's say 30 years ago, the idea of a funeral director also being a celebrant seemed ridiculous, and now it's a bullet you need in your holster for sure, right?
It really is a great tool in the tool belt. Even if you don't practice, as a celebrant and deliver services, it still gives you the perspective to ask relevant questions to get to know the families that you're serving.
So, as someone who's dealing with funeral homes all over the country every day, you're talking about the move toward memorialization and how critical that is. What are some of the things that are really kind of changing in the memorialization space for your colleagues, and what are the tougher sells, I guess, for you to convince funeral directors to take more seriously? Is that the way to put it?
Well, I can appreciate putting it that way. And when you bring up, the important point of all over the country and the way business is done in our industry all over in different areas can be vastly different, different different cultures, different ideas and groups of folks, which is fascinating to me. And Tony, the world around us it changes so quickly, and as well as I do, funeral service, not so much, not so quick to change. So I'm fascinated by the opportunities, really, to bring funeral service into the modern era, and I get to see a lot of that happening in my role. With regard to that, so some of the issues on my radar, honestly, business opportunities and even regulatory challenges with regard to funeral e-commerce and even artificial intelligence. One thing that comes to mind there is pre-planning chatbots online and how that's evolving in our business. But also, and top of almost everybody's mind, honestly, is acquiring, building, retaining, and promoting talent in the next generation of our funeral service workforce. Really exploring, I guess, the creative ways that they can make ceremonies unique and honestly to achieve fulfillment in their work so that they stay in funeral service. And
go ahead.
Yeah, where that goes is what advances that, I believe, is the engagement and dissemination of really, honestly, industry relevant news and information. And that is why I'm excited to be on the advisory board for the KB publications.
Thanks for that. But I'm not going to pick up that segue because I do want to talk about one more thing that you mentioned. I actually ran a story last week or the week before in the recent past. I forget that this isn't coming out right after we hang up the phone. This won't be out for another month or so. Yeah. I ran a story about SCI acquiring, I think it was 3 funeral homes in Arizona. Right. And the owners said that very thing. They said, we have more good people than we could possibly ever promote. And part of their decision was for their employees to give them more opportunity than they would have in in a small regional kind of funeral home group.
Yeah, Tony, you touch on an important point that often is looked over. And I'm glad that they saw that opportunity. Like I said, working 13 years for privately owned funeral homes, I was that employee that got as far as I could go there and could never advance any farther because either I wasn't a family member or what have you. So when I came to SCI, the opportunities for promotion, advancement, learning new skills and ways of business has been just mind-boggling and fascinating. And I'm so glad to have had the opportunities for those advancements.
And now, less about you and more about me. So, what do you look forward to as part of this advisory board, and what do you think you can bring to it, and also what do you think we can bring to it? What do you see as kind of our role as the journalists and your role as a member of the advisory board?
Well, bringing to it my perspective and years of funeral service, quite obviously, but also brainstorming with the other talented professionals that have been selected for this board is going to generate, hopefully, some innovative ideas for content, engaging with readers of different generations in relevant ways for folks to stay informed about the most important topics. That's what I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to eavesdropping on those conversations, especially in the modern world where, there's not only not a newsroom, but I've been in a bubble. I was working at home before the pandemic, so I've been working at home for like 15 years, and you do create this information bubble of like, I look at all the stuff that I look at, and I try to find a new way to say something about it, but it's not always. Any opportunity I have to expand my scope is an opportunity that I crave,
Yes. And it's easy to get stuck in our own little worlds, right? Our own little microcosms and what we deal with day in, day out. And being able to brainstorm with folks that hold different positions and have different views on the way their world is run is really going to help us out.
And that is all I have for you, unless you have something else for me. Is there something I should have asked and didn't, or something you thought that you'd have the opportunity to say, but I didn't provide it to you?
Nothing that I can think of. And I just appreciate you pronouncing my name correctly. That's often a challenge for folks. And it's been really great talking with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you, Tony.
Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you are listening now. You can follow if you're on Apple. There are a bunch of different ways to subscribe to this podcast, and if you do, every time we put out a show, you will get a notification. If you are watching on your computer, just pick up your phone and find the podcatcher on there. On Apple iPhones rather, it is Apple Podcasts, which is a purple circle. On Android phones, a lot of people like to use Spotify. Some people like to use Amazon Music. Some people like to have their own personal podcatcher. Whatever your choice, just type in the words Funeral Service Insider and we will come up. We are the only ones with that name. I do want to invite you really quickly to join us on April 1st and 2nd in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the Funeral Service Business Plan Conference. It's our first live event this year, and our live in-person events have been really successful and really gratifying to both the presenters and the attendees. We should have a list of presenters out shortly, but trust me, it's going to be worth going no matter who is speaking, because we always really get good guests. So that will do it for this week. Actually, that'll just do it from now, and I will be back with you on Friday with the In Case You Missed It podcast, a weekly roundup of news in funeral service. But until then, we will catch you next time.